Hello fellow history geeks, in today's video, we are gonna learn about the history of lamps. What did people back in the day use, and how did the lamp evolve into the lamp that we know it as today? So, around the year 70,000 BC, early humans had created the first lamp by filling hollow rocks, shells and other natural objects with moss or other similar material that was soaked in animal fat and igniting it. The word lamp is from the Greek word lampos, meaning torch. While in the Mediterranean area and the Middle East, their earliest lamp had a shell shape. Originally, the actual shells were used, with sections cut out to provide space for the lighting area, which later these were replaced by pottery, alabaster or even metal lamps shaped to resemble their natural prototypes. In ancient Egypt and China, another basic early type of lamp was a saucer lamp. Their lamps were made out of pottery or bronze. It was sometimes provided with a spike in the center of the declivity to support the wick, which was used to control the rate of burning. There was another version which had a wick channel, which allowed the burning surface of the wick to hang over the edge. Latter type became common in Africa and spread into East Asia as well. The lamps in ancient Greece didn't begin to appear until the 7th century BCE, when they replaced torches and braziers. The pottery version of a Greek lamp was shaped like a shallow cup, with one or more spouts or nozzles in which the wick burned, and it had a circular hole in the top for filling and a carrying handle. Such lamps were usually covered with a heat-resisting red or black glaze. A more expensive type was usually produced in bronze. A standard form had a handle with a ring for the finger and a crescent above for the thumb. Hanging lamps made out of bronze also became popular. The Romans had introduced a new system of manufacturing terracotta lamps, using two molds and then joining the parts together. When they used metal, the shapes became more complex, while sometimes assuming animal or vegetable forms. Very large versions for the use in circuses and other public places appeared during the 1st century CE. There is very little information about the medieval lamps, but what we do know is that they appear to have been open, saucer type, and considerably inferior in performance to the closed lamps of the Romans. But the great step forward in the evolution of the lamp occurred in Europe in the 18th century, with the introduction of a central burner, emerging from a closed container through a metal tube and being controllable by means of a ratchet. The first time the candles were first mentioned is as far back as 5,000 years ago. But unfortunately is there little information that could indicate their original origin, or who actually invented the candle. But there is a common view of the origins of the history of the candle, like it was the ancient Egyptians' use of rush candles, what's called in English, rushlights. So the way that they would create these candles, were to immerse a stick in melted animal fat. But however, they didn't have wicks in the traditional sense of the word. The ancient Egyptians used the rushlights as early as 3,000 BC, but it was the ancient Romans who were actually credited with creating the candle in the traditional sense of the word by dipping rolled papyrus in dissolved tallow or beeswax. Candles were then widely used to illuminate homes. They were also used during religious ceremonies and provided assistance to travelers. The Greeks used the candles, among others, and in honor of the gods during religious celebrations. There are different types of waxes that were used in different religions of the world depending on available sources. In India, for example, the wax was made from the fruit of the cinnamon tree, while in Japan, their wax was obtained from nut. However, in China they had found an interesting solution, where the wick was rolled in rice paper, and then the wax was local insects mixed with grains pressed into a paper form. Candles have also been widely used for religious ceremonies in various cultures. Burning candles have accompanied the Jewish holiday of Hanukkah since around 165 BC. There are also references to candles in the Bible, and they have also been permanently associated with the celebration of Easter since the 4th century AD. In ancient Rome, there were early incarnations of candles that got things moving in the right direction, but they were still what we would call rudimentary. The candles were imprecise and only marginally effective. However, the great leap forward in the history of candlemaking happened first in ancient Rome around the 10th century BC. They were the first ones to use candle wicks, which allowed for a slower and a more controlled burn. And for this, they used animal fat. The modern people do use candles to provide lighting, but we generally do to provide a certain kind of light. While in the pre-electricity era, candles were not used because they provided light, but because they were the only source of light available. You would find candles in streets, temples, homes, and in public spaces. And it's thanks to their relative safety, which is compared to larger flames. Plus, they were also portable, which at that time was a big advantage in an era when bathrooms were located outside of the homes. Candles did also play a big role in worship rituals and ceremonies, especially in ancient Rome and ancient Egypt. In ancient Rome, the candles were often used as an offering to the gods. But that's not the only thing that the candles were used for. In ancient societies, they would mark those candles with measurements as a way to keep track of the passing hours. But it wasn't always precise, but it was more reliable than other methods. After the Roman Empire had collapsed, trading disruptions made olive oil, which at the time was the most common fuel for oil lamps, unavailable throughout much of Europe. And as a consequence, candles became more widely used. Candles were commonplace throughout Europe in the Middle Ages. The candle makers, which are also known as chandlers, which made candles from fats saved from the kitchen or sold their own candle from within their shops. The chandler's trade was recorded by the more picturesque name of a smearmonger, since they oversaw the manufacture of sauces, vinegar, soap and cheese. Tallow, fat from cows or sheeps, became the standard material used in candles in Europe. However, the unpleasant smell from tallow candles is due to the glycerin that they contain. The smell of the manufacturing process was so unpleasant that they got banned by ordinance in several European cities. When they discovered beeswax could be used in candle making, they used it, since it didn't have an unpleasant smell to it. But it remained restricted in usage for the rich and for churches and royal events, due to their great expense. In France and England, candle making had become a guild craft by the 13th century. There was a French guild that had been documented as early as 1061. The Tallow Chandlers' Company of London was formed in about 1300 in London, and in 1456 it was granted a coat of arms. The Wax Chandlers' Company had existed since 1330, and had acquired its charter in 1484. And by 1415, tallow candles were used in street lighting. So the first candle mold comes from the 15th century in Paris. Sieur de Breze had introduced the technique of using a mold, although the candles had a tendency to stick to the mold and break when it was being removed from the mold. The real improvement for the efficient production of candles with mold was only achieved in the 19th century. In the Middle East, during the Abbasid and Fatimid caliphates, beeswax was the dominant material used for candle making. The beeswax was usually imported from long distances, for example, candle makers from Egypt, they used beeswax from Tunis. And as in Europe, these candles were fairly expensive, and most commoners used oil lamps instead. The rich people could afford large sums on expensive candles. For example, the Abbasid Caliph al-Mutawakkil spent 1.2 million silver dirhams annually on candles for his royal palaces. In early modern Syria, the candles were in high demand by all socioeconomic classes, because they were customarily lit during marriage ceremonies. There were candle makers that guilds in the Safavid capital of Isfahan during the 1500 and 1600. However, the candle makers had a relatively low social position in Safavid Iran, which was comparable to barbers, bathhouse workers, fortune tellers, bricklayers, and porters. Meanwhile, in China, beeswax candles were common in the Tang and the Sung dynasties. Wax was from a plant, called Stillingia tallow from the Chinese tallow tree, which may be used to make candles together with the beeswax. The Stillingia tallow has a low melting point and it therefore may be encased with the harder beeswax. The Chinese may have started cultivating the tallow tree in the Yangtze Delta region in the 7th century. The wax from the plant was commonly used to make Buddhist ceremonial candles. There is another type of wax. The Chinese wax was derived from insects and resembles the best spermaceti, may also be used. The production of Chinese wax was mastered by the Yuan dynasty. A type of Chinese candles has a bamboo rod as its core, onto which paper is wound spirally with a rush pith as wick, and this is then repeatedly dipped in melted wax or fats and cooled until the desired size was reached. If you wanted candles that were colored, and sometimes even decorated with characters. The Japanese have similar candle-making techniques just like the Chinese, but they also developed a method of molding candles using paper tubes. They may have a Japanese wax tree for making candles. The wax from building cinnamon was used for temple candles in India, while yak butter was used for candles in Tibet. With the growth of the whaling industry in the 18th century, the spermaceti, which is an oil that comes from a cavity in the head of the sperm whale, which became a widely used substance for candle making. The wax was made by crystallizing the oil, and was the first candle substance to become available in mass quantities. Just like beeswax, the spermaceti wax didn't create a repugnant odor. When being burned, an odor produced a significantly brighter light. However, it was also harder than either tallow or beeswax, so it wouldn't soften or bend in the summer heat. The first, standard candles, were made from spermaceti wax. By the 1800s, an even cheaper alternative was discovered. It's called colza oil. It's derived from Brassica campestris, and a similar oil derived from rapeseed yielded candles that produce clear and smokeless flames. The French chemists named Michel Eugène Chevreul, 1786 to 1889, and Joseph Louis Gay-Lussac, 1778 to 1850, patented stearin in 1825. And like tallow, this was from animals, but had no glycerin content. The manufacture of candles became an industrialized mass market in the mid-19th century. In 1834, a pewterer named Joseph Morgan, he was from Manchester, England. He patented a machine that revolutionized candle making. The machine allowed a continuous production of molded candles, using a cylinder with a movable piston to eject candles as they solidified. This method produced around 1.500 candles per hour. And according to his patent, with 3 men and 5 boys, the machine will manufacture 2 tons of candle in 12 hours. That's quite a lot, if I'm gonna be honest. 2 tons, in just 12 hours. But by that, it would mean that poor people could easily afford candles. At this time, candle makers also began to fashion wicks out of tightly braided, and rather simply twisted, strands of cotton. This technique makes wicks curl over as they burn, while maintaining the height of the wick and therefore the flame. Meaning that much of the excess wick is incinerated, because they are referred to as a self-trimming, or a self-consuming wicks. In 1848, a guy named James Young had established the world's first oil refinery at the Alfreton Ironworks in Riddings, Derbyshire. 2 paraffin wax candles were made from the naturally occurring paraffin wax that's present in the oil, and these candles illuminated a lecture at the Royal Institution by Lyon Playfair. During the mid-1850s, James Young succeeded in distilling paraffin wax from coal and oil shales at Bathgate in West Lothian, and developed a commercially viable method of production. The paraffin wax was processed by distilling residue left after the crude petroleum was refined. The paraffin could be used to make inexpensive candles of high quality. It was bluish-white wax that was burned cleanly, meaning that it left no unpleasant odor, unlike the tallow candles. It was a drawback to the substances that were early coal and petroleum-derived paraffin waxes that had a very low melting point. When the stearin was introduced, and discovered by Michel Eugène Chevreul, who solved this problem. The stearin is hard and durable, with a convenient melting range of 54 to 72.5 Celsius or 129.2 to 162.5 F. By the end of the 19th century, most candles were being manufactured that consisted of paraffin and stearic acid. By the 19th century, Price's Candles, based in London, and is still around, was the largest candle manufacturer in the world. The company traced its origin back to 1830, when William Wilson invested in 1,000 acres, or 1.6 sq mi, or 4 kilometers. There he had a coconut plantation in Sri Lanka. There his aim was to make candles from coconut oil. Later he tried palm oil from palm trees. His accidental discovery swept all his ambitions aside, when his son George Wilson, who was a talented chemist, distilled the first petroleum oil in 1854. George also pioneered the implementation of the technique of steam distillation, and was thus able to manufacture candles from a wide range of raw materials, including skin, fat bone, oil and industrial greases. Meanwhile in America, especially Syracuse, New York, there had been a global center for candle manufacturing from the mid-19th century. Manufacturers that include Will and Baumer, Mac Miller, Munch Kreutzer, and Cathedral Candle Company. But despite all of the advances in candle making, the candle industry declined rapidly upon the introduction of the superior methods of lighting, which included kerosene lamps, and from 1879 the incandescent light bulb. And from then on, candles came to be marketed as more of a decorative item. Candles still retain their unique symbolic significance, for instance as votive offerings. Candles became more available in a broad array of sizes, shapes, and colors, and people became more interested in scented candles. I mean, who doesn't like the nice smell of scented candles? I mean, I do. Please let me know in the description box down below which scented candle you like at the moment. But, during the 1990s, there were new types of candle waxes that were being developed due to an unusually high demand for candles. The paraffin, a byproduct of oil, was quickly replaced by new waxes and wax blends owing to rising costs. Candle manufacturers looked at waxes such as soy, palm, and flaxseed oil, which often blending them with paraffin to achieve the performance of paraffin with the price that benefits the other waxes. And the creation of unique wax blends, that now require different fragrance chemistry and loads, encouraged candle wick manufacturers to innovate to meet performance needs, with the often tougher to burn formulations. Well, that would be it for this video. This was just the first part of this small mini-series. I hope you have enjoyed this video. Please let me know in the description down below what you want me to cover in my next video.
Bye!